Hi Therese, good to see you today. So I'd just like to talk to you about some of the results we got back from Declan's assessment. He's demonstrated some really great strengths, but also a few areas which could definitely be improved. So I'd like to talk about how we might work on those with you today. So to begin with, his screening for articulation and phonology came back, and we were happy to see that he can actually produce 50% of word clusters that are usually acquired at the age of 4.5 years, which is a little bit ahead. In terms of his language sample, he was able to use the past tense ed a lot. So he said he was able to say things like, I pushed that and I goed there. So he can talk about things in the past, which is good, which is a requirement for his age. So that's very good. And then in terms of his conversational sample, he demonstrated on-topic responses to the clinicians to my initiations and maintained the topic by using appropriate vocabulary and competent. So it demonstrated that he was competent in his receptive language abilities. He's also, in terms of his articulation, he's mostly intelligible, which is quite a strength in terms of being understood, and indicates that his motor skills are generally intact. And now, in terms of what we definitely could work on, so the medial D and final K in his speech samples need to be worked on. They're typically acquired by the age of 3, so we could definitely work on getting him to produce those phonemes effectively. He hasn't, in his language sample, he demonstrates a lack of use of prepositions, articles. So, the and, so the word the and is. So that is generally acquired by the age of 2 to 3 years. So he's a little bit delayed in that respect, but we can get him working on that. So that's a definite focus for the therapy intervention. He's also using a lot of gestures, which suggests that in alongside one word utterances, which may be indicative of his expressive language difficulties. And then in terms of his conversational sample, he demonstrated limited morphosyntax, a short attention span, which was which impacted on the ability to assess him. So by the age of 3, he should generally be using 4 to 5 words in a sentence. So that's definitely something that we can start focusing on as well. And definitely something that we can treat. In terms of his pragmatics, he does have some attentional difficulties which will need to be accommodated for in planning his intervention. So I'd like to suggest that we use a client-centred approach due to its naturalness and practicality in terms of using functional language. So this will be achieved through facilitative play in an authentic, natural environment for the child, and he'll be able to lead and initiate behaviours which we can encourage. So in terms of strategies for assisting Declan with his expressive language difficulties, I would suggest you talk to him as much as possible. So often throughout the day, as you're going about what you're doing, talk about what you're doing and where you're going and what you're going to do and what you've just done in your daily activities. So engage in lots of activities like going shopping, going to the park and to the museum, and then talk or draw or act out what you just did and saw. And while doing this, you can name items together. So when you're looking at items at the grocery store or outside, you can name what you're seeing, or while you're playing or whilst you're shopping, you can just start naming in order to increase his vocabulary. Also, when talking, just try to get face to face with him so that he can watch your mouth and imitate how to produce the words, and also to eliminate distractions. And then aside from that, another strategy you could use would be to play with him. So for the child to engage in play on a regular basis, you can model how to play with toys and follow his lead and talk about what you're doing with the toys in order to encourage him to use language. And then you can expand on the language that he's using by repeating what he says or adding one or two more words to his utterances. So, for example, when he says dog, you could say, yes, a big dog. And then, make sure you choose something that Declan really enjoys, and throughout the game model new words and phrases, and while doing this provide opportunities for choice making. So offer the child choices so that he's encouraged to use words to make a request rather than relying on his gestures. And also just model back to the child the utterances that he says incorrectly in a correct way. So for an example, if he says, me want that one, you would say, I want red apples, please, as an example. Okay.